It is now 6:30, and I'm calling to order the Police Accountability Board meeting. It's Wednesday, September 14th, and we have in front of us the agenda for approval. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda or add any changes that you may want.
I move to approve the agenda.
It's been a motion to approve the agenda. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye. There's discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Anyone opposed? Agenda has been approved. Just to also mention that this meeting is being recorded, and it will be available on social media, on I think YouTube, and also the website, the county website. We just want to give you an update in terms of introductions. We had at our last meeting appointed two administrative charging committee members, and before this meeting we did have administrative charging committee meeting. The two members that we appointed was Alexa Billups and Scott Deacon, and Scott was nominated as chair of the ACC, and I was nominated as vice chair of the ACC. We also appointed a new member to the trial board, and that was Stephanie Deal. And Stephanie will serve on this trial board. It's sort of fluid as to when that will all start, because it starts when we do have an appeal to the trial board. So that's a process that's a little bit fluid at this point. Under old business, just to look at the website. We have some updates to the website. We have added the names that I mentioned to the website, so the website is now up to date with the new members of the ACC and also for the Police Accountability Board. Also on the website, you'll be able to find the agenda and the minutes. The minutes, of course, would be the videos of the recorded meetings. There aren't any written minutes out there for the Police Accountability Board. So you do have that on the website. Since our last meeting, we mentioned that we did have the complaint form that's been approved. We have received 3 complaints from citizens since the last meeting. We're required to forward those complaints on to the law enforcement agency within 72 hours of receiving the complaints. We have done that. And what happens next is that law enforcement agency will investigate those 3 complaints. The results of that investigation would go to the ACC for deliberation. So that's how it's all connected. But we do have 3. We've also added to the website what we call a complaint tracker. Now, you probably can't see it all from where you're sitting, but what it will do, it has a PAB number. It will also have the number that the law enforcement agency assigned to it. Excuse me, a sort of a generic description of related to the type of complaint it is, and it will show the public the status of that complaint. So anyone can go to the website, look at that, bring up the tracker, and look at how many complaints we have and what the actual status of the complaint. At this time, we have a series of I would call them informational presentations tonight. With respect to what the Police Accountability Board is responsible for doing, that is one of the responsibilities is to look at and work with the law enforcement agencies and look for opportunities to improve the process of the overall complaint process that, and how they handle it. So in order to do that, we really need to understand each of the law enforcement agencies and where the PAB and the Administrative Charging Committee will fit in that overall process. So I'm starting off with a presentation on the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, so that you have, some of you may be familiar with that organization. It's sort of a organization that sets the standards for law enforcement. There are 2 levels. I think there's basic and advanced. And it's sort of a way that we can get an appreciation for the kind of policies that needs to be in place and how they're being executed. So first we'll have a presentation on, this is called CALEA, and then we'll go into presentations from the law enforcement agencies that we have tonight. We thank the Calvert County Sheriff's Office for being here. They will give us a presentation that we requested at the last meeting on the structure and how they handle complaints. And we also have the Maryland State Police here to do the same thing. Both organizations are unique, and as we go through, you'll see that the state organization structured differently, and there are different lines of authority and what we can and cannot do as a PAB with respect to the state agencies. So, Cindy?
Next slide.
Next slide.
Mr. Perrin, thank you, sir. So, I don't know if you all are familiar, but institutions of higher education as well as hospitals all have an accreditation process. Well, back in 1979, 4 law enforcement organizations came together and said, hey, we want to set national standards for police practicing, best practices for police, the way officers police. So those 4 organizations were the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE, the National Sheriff's Association, and then the Police Executive Research Forum. So this group came together, they formed a CALEA, and since then they've been writing standards for best practices. CALEA is a voluntary process. Law enforcement organizations are not forced to participate in CALEA. They voluntarily join CALEA, and then they voluntarily have these CALEA assessors looking at their policies and procedures, their practices, and they go through a very rigorous analysis of how they do things, and then they make recommendations. Next slide, Mr. Perrin, please. Okay. There's a brief video that's on the CALEA website. I don't know if any of you all had taken an opportunity to look at it, but at this time we'll ask that the brief video be shown. Next slide, please. Can you let them advance it for us? Thank you. Back, there you go. Thank you, Mr. Perrin. So CALEA is not a gotcha organization. It's designed to help guide law enforcement organizations to produce best practices in policing. That CALEA has written standards and has law enforcement organizations take a comprehensive look at how they conduct police business in their communities. They look at everything from hiring practices to the benefits that are given to law enforcement officers and employees. They look at the officers' jurisdictional boundaries. They look at evidence on practices and policies on how evidence is gathered and stored and accounted for. They'll look at arrest procedures. They look at patrol procedures, how organizations patrol their communities and things like that. They address budget and finance, every conceivable aspect of a law enforcement agency. There are CALEA standards that could help raise the practices and professionalism of those organizations. And again, it's not a gotcha process, and the law enforcement organizations that do participate volunteer to participate in this process and have CALEA come in and take a look at their organizations. They highlight what they do really well, and those practices are shared with other law enforcement agencies, not only across the nation, but conceivably internationally as well. And then if there's some challenges that the police organizations have, they can help them, address their policies or their practice to help improve policing within their communities. And then the law enforcement agencies that are participating, they kind of lean on each other and they bounce policies and procedures and practices off of each other, and they work collaboratively together for the good of policing. So there's two types of accreditation that a law enforcement organization could agree to participate in. The first is just a law enforcement accreditation, which has 180 standards, and it looks at best practices as related to life, health, safety, those types of procedures. And again, they're things that are done, the basics of contemporary law enforcement. Then there's an advanced law enforcement accreditation process. And the difference is the advanced accreditation has 458 standards, which CALEA asks the law enforcement agencies to meet, to write policies and for those standards as well. Not only does the agencies that opt into it, not only do they have to write the policies and procedures that comply with the CALEA standards, then they have to prove that they are in fact following those policies and procedures. It's not an easy process for the law enforcement agencies that do participate. It takes a lot of time and effort and dedication for those agencies that do opt into it. And it can be challenging at times, but in the end, it does help the law enforcement organizations improve the way they operate. If you go to the next slide, Mr. Perrin. Thank you, sir. So the difference in this kind of gives you an idea of some of the standards or some of the things that, this is just chapter 1, part of chapter 1 in the CALEA standards. So these are some of the things that are looked at by CALEA, the policies that need to be written. The standards that are bolded are the basic law enforcement accreditation. So they make sure that the police organizations have an oath of office, they have a code of ethics. It says what their legal authority is defined. So the ones that you see that are bolded and asterisk, those are the ones that are with the basic law enforcement accreditation. The entire chapter are standards that law enforcement agencies that opt into the advanced accreditation meet. And just to let you know, some of these standards have sub-standards in them as well. So you could have a standard, and then they would have bullets A through F. So it's not an easy task for these law enforcement agencies that do opt into it, but it certainly does help improve their practices. And then if you go to the next slide, Mr. Perrin. So this gives you an idea of what a standard is. This one here happens to say that the agency will have a written directive, which is a policy, that requires all personnel to abide by a code or a canon of ethics adopted by the agency. So they have to have a policy that talks about what their code of ethics is. And not only do they have to have a policy, the standard mandates that every law enforcement officer participate in ethics training at a minimum every other year, twice every other year they have to participate. And then they have to prove again that they did do that. So they have to write a policy, they have to provide the training. And the way that a law enforcement agency might prove this is that they'll produce the policy that they've written, they'll produce how they've distributed that policy to their personnel, then they'll prove that they've provided the training or offered the training. They may give the lesson plan as a proof of compliance. And then they could come up with a sign-in sheet where the law enforcement officer signed in to take the training. They could come up with test results if the law enforcement agency decided to give a test on that particular training. And that's how they have to prove that they did participate. In the CALEA cycle, the first 3 years of a CALEA cycle is 4 years long. The first 3 years is they do basic file checks. They'll go into the files and look and make sure that these policies are written and that there's proofs of compliance to go with the standard. And then the fourth year, they actually send assessors to the police organization and they do an on-site assessment. So it's a build-up over a 4-year period, over a 3-year period into the fourth year. If they're doing the 400 plus standards, the CALEA might look at 100 standards the first year, 100 standards the second year, 100 standards the third year, and then by the fourth year they'll look at what's remaining, and then come and actually physically inspect how the operations go. And again, if anywhere along the line an assessor finds during the file review that maybe the policy could be tightened up a little bit here, or they don't quite have a proof of compliance, the agency's got 4 years to get it all together to show that they are in fact participating in following this, the standards, and I think that is it. It is it. Next slide, Mr. Perrin. Did you want me to entertain any questions?
Well, any questions or clarification on this accreditation process?
Are our organizations accredited?
They will be sharing that information in the presentation. That's one of the questions we asked them. Any other questions or? So with this accreditation process, as you mentioned, it's not only just writing the policies and procedures, but you have to execute and live by those. And so an accrediting organization or group team will come out and look at a law enforcement agency policy and see how they're actually executing those?
Yeah, the execution are the proofs of compliance, how they're walking the talk.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on? All right. So now we have two of our law enforcement agencies here to give us a presentation on their respective organizations. Captain Parrott, we'll start with the Calvert County Sheriff's Office. Tell us who you're, have a seat.
Next slide. Mr.
Bring up
Perrin.
anyone.
My name is Captain Brent Parrott. I'm the commander of the Office of Professional Standards at the Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Perrin, I think we get the taking control of this.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I put a PowerPoint presentation together for the committees, just to go over the Sheriff's Office complaint process, how we receive them.
That's to advance your PowerPoint.
It may take, I'm not.
You'll need to.
Oh, you'll get through it.
So as we move forward, if you have any questions, you feel free to ask. I'm going to start off the PowerPoint with our current organizational structure within the Sheriff's Office. We have approximately 168 sworn deputy sheriffs in our employment. And if you look at the overall structure, it shows the breakdown from the sheriff all the way down to the separate bureaus that we have within the agency. Doesn't list all the employees, but it lists the job task assignments for some of those bureaus.
Captain, before you go any further into the organization, I want to make sure that we all understand that the structure under the county, Board of County Commissioners, the sheriff organization is an independent
Yes, sir.
organization. And John, if I'm incorrect on that, you can correct me. But that's important to understand that the sheriff office, the commissioners are responsible, the county is responsible for funding the sheriff's office, just like the school board. But they are independent organizations.
Yes, sir. The sheriff's an elected official,
Yes.
basically a state official. So he doesn't work directly for the Board of County Commissioners. He's his own boss. He works for the citizens of Calvert County. His sworn deputy sheriffs, as I work for the sheriff. However, we do follow the Calvert County Personnel Code. In a lot of instances, we may deal with human resources for different things, and county directors for different county department heads. But as far as the sheriff goes, he is an elected official. The training commission doesn't even govern the sheriff's authority. He works for the citizens of Calvert County or whatever county they may be elected to. So back to the organizational structure, it's just a brief overview. We had a larger one. I just couldn't get it on the PowerPoint, so I just want to kind of give you a brief overview. Do you have any questions specifically about the organizational structure as you see it?
It's an eye test, but
What's that, sir?
it's an eye test for us, but
Yes,
go
it
ahead.
is. I'm struggling a little bit. All right, go to the next slide. Okay. The Office of Professional Standards, most people know it as internal affairs. Our primary job function within the office is to oversee and conduct impartial investigations into alleged employee misconduct. We conduct, review complaint investigations for consistency, fairness, and strive to accomplish these tasks with professionalism, integrity, compassion, and respect and order to maintain the highest standards of public trust. When we are sworn in to take the oath to be police officers, whether it's with the sheriff's office or any other police agency, our citizens expect us to be held to a higher standard. And that's what our office does. We ensure that our officers are doing what they're supposed to do in their daily job duties. An investigation. So when the sheriff's office receives a citizen complaint against a police officer for the performance of their duty, we receive it. We enter that complaint into a case tracking system, which if it comes in through the sheriff's office to a supervisor, they would enter it to our blue team system. And then it goes into our complaint tracker database that we implemented based on the new legislation that just came out last year. The complaint is then assessed by staff and OPS and the employee's affected bureau commander. After the assessment of the complaint, the case is assigned to an investigator for an investigation. Now that could be either at the field level, to a sergeant or a corporal, or it could be into an investigator in the Office of Professional Standards. It depends on what the allegation is and how severe it is. The complainant is then notified via an initial letter that we received the complaint against personnel and has been assigned to the investigation. We also provide the investigator's name and contact information. So within the sheriff's office, we have a mediation component to the complaint process. Several years ago, one of my sergeants that worked for me came up with an idea to have a mediation. It's a alternative resolution to the traditional complaint process. So what this is, and the new legislation that has come out in 21 and 22 has also discussed the mediation. We're the first agency in the state of Maryland to go to something like that. It's worked well for us. We don't mediate all cases. It just depends on what the allegation is. We'll assess the complaint. Again, the Office of Professional Standards and Command Staff, and we'll determine, or we can determine, if that case is suitable for mediation. It's a confidential alternative to the traditional complaint process. It offers a different way of handling the concerns or frustrations of a citizen and police officers after interacting with one another. These concerns and frustrations often lead to citizens filing complaints, but they may not get a resolution other than, hey, the complaint was either non-sustained or exonerated the officer. The mediator in a case like that is a neutral party, is trained and experienced in assisting citizens and officers in talking through and attempting to resolve their differences that they may have had in their interaction.
Before you go, a question on that
Yes, sir.
piece. So in the, going through the mediation process, let's say if I had a complaint about an officer, and walk me through what happens. I submit that complaint, someone contacts me, and what happens,
So basically, we'll send you a letter to let you know that we received it.
right?
So for purposes of mediation, for example, say the complaint is the citizen didn't like the way the officer talked to them. Now, the officer, when we make them aware of the complaint, they may not feel that they said anything inappropriate or their attitude that they thought was fine, but maybe the citizen didn't. So back in the old days, when we had a complaint like that, we would investigate it and just say that we couldn't find enough evidence to say that the officer violated agency policy or was rude to the citizen. We would let the citizen know, hey, we investigated the complaint, but we didn't find any evidence that the officer did anything wrong. So that left that citizen in some aspects, really, what did they get out of it? Other than filing a complaint and us telling you the officer didn't violate policy. What the mediation allows, it allows, if the citizen agrees and the officer agrees, it allows them to come to a neutral location with a third party to discuss what happened, to discuss the events that led to the complaint. And in doing so, you could get a little more resolution out of that interaction than you would in a normal complaint process. And we see that benefits. We've got positive feedback from citizens, positive feedback from the officers. And even when we were vetting this process through before we implemented it, we had stakeholders like the NAACP involved. We discussed the mediation process with them and various stakeholders just to garner some feedback on what their thoughts would be to implement something like that. And we got very positive feedback, so we put it in play. I think it was back probably, it was in the earlier 2000s, and it's worked very well. Now, we don't mediate all cases. For example, if we get a force complaint where a citizen is alleging that the officer used excessive force, we won't mediate those cases. And the reason why is because they not only have potential criminal overtones, but they could have civil liability overtones in a civil lawsuit. So we tend to stay away from mediation on that end and just do the traditional complaint process.
So any feedback from complainants in terms of feeling they would be intimidated to meet that officer again and sit down?
No, because they have to agree. So
Okay,
So if we think that that's a suitable case for mediation, we would notify the mediation center. We don't have any involvement in that particular stage after that. So that mediation center will reach out to both the complainant and the officer. And it's totally voluntary. If the citizen says they don't want to go, they don't have to go. We continue with the investigation. If both parties agree to go, that will be the resolution, whatever comes up at the end. And there is no further investigation with it. But they know that up front. Both the officer and the citizen understand that, and they agree to that. And we've had some where the citizen didn't wish to go to mediation, and then the officer didn't either. So we
Right.
continue with the investigation, the traditional process.
So,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, like a clarifying question on that. I heard you say that, like excessive force doesn't meet the criteria, for mediation. What is your threshold for mediating complaints?
The minor complaints such as rude and discourteous, for example. Just say
Okay.
that the citizen just didn't like the officer's attitude. They thought the officer was, maybe being demeaning or talking down to them. I'm just giving you an example. And maybe the officer didn't feel that. Maybe that's just the officer, that's just how they are. Doesn't mean that they were doing anything wrong. But this process would give the ability for both of the officer and the citizen to come together so the citizen can voice their concern. And you never know, maybe the officer was having a bad day, or maybe the citizen was having a bad day. And maybe in talking through the process, maybe they, you know what, yeah, my kid irritated me that day, maybe I was having an off day.
Okay.
And you get a little resolution to it, and, you know, it works out a little bit better maybe than the traditional process.
And this may be a little preemptive because you haven't finished your presentation yet, and we're already jumping in with questions. But in the process of making that determination on whether something goes to mediation or not, and even in your the way that you guys process your complaints, does, in this age of technology, body-worn cameras, cell phone videos, do you consider that before you make a determination on whether or not something is mediated, or does that even play a factor?
It may in some cases it doesn't. You know, sometimes we get speeding complaints, for example. We get citizens that'll call in sometimes and say an officer was speeding. May not give you necessarily a car number, just say, you know, that officers are speeding, or that they do identify a particular car number. Sometimes, you know, we may reach out to the mediation center to see if they want to mediate that case. But again, it's totally voluntary. They don't have to do it, and the officer doesn't have to do it. But we don't do it in all cases, just because of the different overtones it could have, whether it's criminal or civil.
Right. Okay.
I think we have another question.
So if it goes to mediation, and through the mediation, you said that the investigation through the sheriff's office ends then.
Yes, ma'am.
If the mediator finds that there was some wrongdoing on the, you know, through the sheriff's office, does it come back to you then, or do they resolve it?
It's resolved there.
So there's, if there were action that needed to be taken, it would never get back to you guys?
No, ma'am. So the mediation is a resolution there.
Okay.
And again, we make that clear to both the officer and the citizen prior to them accepting the invitation to do mediation. So they are aware of that. Now, again, we do a little legwork, like you were asking me. If we see it's blatant misconduct that needs to be addressed, then maybe that case is not suitable to mediation at that point.
Okay, so it's just minor?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, just minor cases.
And do you have any stats on how many cases have been mediated roughly?
I don't have them
Yeah.
before me, but yes,
Okay.
yep.
Question,
Yes, sir.
who makes up your mediation team, sworn or civilian?
It's a,
And are they trained, certified
yes,
mediators?
sir. So we have a mediation center here in Calvert County.
Mhm.
So if we had a case that went to mediation, we would call them and they take over at that point. They are trained mediators, and they often travel beyond Calvert County to give their mediation services. I think Charles and St. Mary's have mediation centers too, if I'm not mistaken, but yes,
Thank you.
yes, sir.
Has the mediation ever not come to a successful conclusion?
Yes, sir, yeah, because they'll give each person a survey to fill out when it's done. And we've had some surveys come back where the mediation center had shared that there just wasn't a resolution there in the case. But that was the resolution to the case. But yes.
So that wouldn't initiate or reinitiate
No,
your
sir.
investigation?
No, sir, no.
Anything else?
So mediations, identified mediation cases are forwarded to the mediation center for referral. It's voluntary, a confidential process in which both parties must agree to attend. If either party does not agree to attend, the complaint is assigned for investigation, and it goes through the traditional process. If both parties agree, then there will be no further investigation. The case will be closed, and mediation being the resolution. At the conclusion of an investigation and the finding of facts, the investigation is forwarded through the chain of command through the effective bureau commander to the assistant sheriff. During this process, the investigation findings are reviewed. If sustained, a recommendation of disciplinary action at that point. There are four different types of investigative findings that we use when we're investigating cases. The first one is a sustained violation. And the charging committee, you'll see those when you are ready to view cases. You're going to see these types of findings when we send the cases over to you for review. The sustained finding means the deputy violated agency policy. They did something wrong, so the citizen, their complaint was factual, true, and the officer was in violation of some agency policy. Non-sustained, there's just not an evidence to support misconduct or policy violations. There just may not be enough there to support whether the officer did anything wrong or to support what the citizen was saying. Exonerated means that the incident did occur, but the officer acted within the scope of his authority and within agency policy and procedures. Unfounded means it never occurred. There's no evidence to suggest the alleged misconduct occurred. So those are the 4 findings that we use. And again, we're finders of fact, not opinions. It's what the facts dictate to us to close the case out with one of those findings. At the conclusion, if disciplinary action is recommended and the deputy does not accept the recommended penalty, the matter is referred to a trial board for final disposition. After case adjudication, a final letter is sent to the citizen complaint, notifying them of the outcome of the investigation to include the case finding and, if applicable, the administered disciplinary action. So we put together, Lieutenant Bowen put together a complaint process flow chart that we use within the sheriff's office, and it's in light of the new legislative changes. Can you guys make that out? It's a little small.
We can't, I can't see that.
You have the ability to print the PowerPoint out, but anyway, it just goes back to what, it's just showing what I'd already talked about when we receive the complaints and they're assessed, they're investigated, and it talks about the referral to mediation, and it talks about referring to a trial board if the officer, it is a sustained violation, they do not accept the penalty.
So they'll have, we'll have copies of this presentation, right?
Yes, sir, yeah, I sent it to you.
We have it.
All right, you got it?
It's in our
All
email.
right.
So the public service statistics you wanted me to print out, I sent
Yes.
a copy so everybody had to look at. CCSO policies, if you go into the Calvert County government website and go into the sheriff's office, our policies are on our sheriff's office website. And I kind of went through some of the key policies that we have that are important. Sometimes we get complaints, and so OPS complaint process falls under Chapter 7. That goes over exactly what I was explaining to you today. Some of what my role is as the commander, what my investigators' roles are. Search and seizure is under Chapter 10. Body-worn cameras, that's a hot button in today's society. It's Chapter 11. Use of force, that's Chapter 8. And vehicle pursuits. They're very high liability areas for us, use of force and vehicle pursuits, civil and criminal. So I just thought it was important to put some for you in case you wanted to look at it. So accreditation, in 2006 our agency began the accreditation process. It was a long process to get to the point where in 2010 CLIA assessors conducted an on-site assessment of our agency to make sure we were in compliance with accreditation standards. In 2010, we were awarded full accreditation status by the CLIA Commission, and we remained accredited through 2016. So we had an initial assessment and then one follow-up assessment. Does anybody have any questions?
So you no longer hold that accreditation?
No, ma'am. Nope.
Okay.
When you have a disposition in an internal affairs case, is training ever part of the final disposition in addition to the penalty that
Yes,
people
sir, it
assess?
can be. Oftentimes, there are training components to it, remedial training. Yes, that is part of the disposition. It can be. Just depends on what the assistant sheriff final adjudication is.
I have, several questions. I'll try to narrow it down to 2. With regards to the statistics, how often are you seeing complaints come in against the same officer? And when those come in, even if they've been exonerated before, how do you approach that in your investigation process, if that's a consideration at all?
It is. Whenever we get complaints, because sometimes, you may have complaints against officers that there's just not enough evidence to support that there's misconduct there.
Mhm.
But sometimes where there's smoke, there could be fire. So we're always cognizant of complaints coming in on particular officers, that same particular officer, of say the same type of complaint.
Right.
For example, speeding.
Okay.
If you get 3 or 4 speeding complaints on one particular officer, even though the first two you couldn't substantiate that the officer was speeding, it maybe there's something there to it. You know, multiple different citizens complaining about one thing on one particular officer. So yes, we're very cognizant of that. And that could be an instance where we send them back to some retraining. But we don't have it, in my experience, I've been doing this particular assignment for close to 10 years. I don't run across a lot of complaints on one particular officer that is repetitive, that where we have those issues. We're a smaller agency. I think larger agencies like State Police, Baltimore City, for example, where they're stretched out across the state, they may not know particular troopers or particular city officers that are in certain parts of the state or certain districts because they're so large. And so, you know, your early intervention systems are good for those large agencies. We're a little smaller, so we kind of know what goes on with our officers when we have those things come in.
Okay. My other question with regards to the CALIA status currently being unaccredited, what other than the policies that you've called out for us, are there any other bodies of law or maybe local bodies that you guys look to for accountability or best practices? And as a secondary to that question, with us being part of what we call the Tri-County area, including Charles and St. Mary's, are there any relationships that you've established with those sheriff's departments to share stats, things that may be happening in those communities that could better help policing here in Calvert County, anything like that?
We do, actually. So the first part of your question, the Maryland Police Training Commission, they often put out structured policies that agencies can use. For example, use of force, body-worn camera policies. So we often look to them. I think in the previous example, there was a couple. PERF is a very good one. The Executive for Law Enforcement, that's a very good, and ICP is a very good sounding board that you can use for information that we do use. The second part of your question, yes, we have a very good working relationship with with Sheriff Barry and Sheriff Cameron in Charles and St. Mary's County. I call their internal affairs folks over there sometimes if I want to bounce an idea, if I'm working a case, just to get some feedback from them and what their thoughts may be, and, you know, think outside the box a little bit. Maybe somebody else can show a little different perspective than what I'm thinking. So yes, and we do it for policies and procedures too. Charles County is currently accredited. They're still accredited. They have been for some time. So yes, we do call on them sometimes when we are writing new policy to get some guidance from them. And we do it across the state. There is a MAPS group. It's a planners group that I'm part of. When I was the commander of administration and policies and procedures fell under my command, we send emails. I see them every day that come in through the state. Various agencies may ask for policies on certain things that other agencies are doing, and we get them every day. So if we have policies that could address what they're asking, we send them our policy, and vice versa. We get policy from them too, and we use it as guides to write our own policies. So we're all intertwined, some shape or form across the state. And the state police is a great sounding board too, because their legal affairs section up there and their hearing boards folks, they're very good at what they do. So we may call upon them to conduct investigations. We may call upon them to get some internal affairs advice, again, just to see a different perspective. So yeah, we work well with our partners.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Regarding the accreditation, why did it lapse, and are there plans to be reaccredited?
Sheriff Evans, he made that determination to move away from it. You know, like Ms. Allen was saying, it's very time consuming. It requires, for example, Charles County Sheriff's Office, they have a staff of folks that deal strictly with CALIA. We didn't have that ability with the Sheriff's Office here because we're so small. So our administrative services commander, he oversaw the CALIA process, but most of the folks that were doing proof gathering we're all part-time, so we would be doing that on outside of our normal duties and assignments. So it got to be very tasking. You know, why the sheriff went away from it, that's a question that you would have to ask.
And I think your office is in a unique position right now that you will have new leadership in the next couple of months. So some of the questions that we may ask today, we'll bring those back and see if there are any consideration. But we do understand that, have an appreciation for the fact that we're really close to the election right now.
Yes, we are. 2 months.
Any other questions, comments for Captain Parrott?
Captain, you mentioned something about the Maryland Police Training Commission,
Yes, sir.
and your basic training still falls under the auspices of the Maryland Police Training Commission,
Yes, sir, yeah.
as with all agencies within the state, correct?
Yes, sir, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I do have a question. I kind of want to go back to the complaints, just for clarification. How do you determine a complaint to be administratively closed?
So the administrative closure could mean that, say the officer leaves the agency prior to an investigation being concluded.
Okay.
We can't take action against that officer because they're gone, so we just administratively close it out. There's no resolution so we do have a few of those. In some instances too, the complainants just, they don't cooperate. So for example, we may give them a complaint against personnel form. We explain to them how to fill it out, how to submit it. They can submit it in person, they can submit it via email, they can submit it via regular mail. And sometimes we don't get those back. And it's hard for us sometimes, because we need some specifics from the complainant as to, is there multiple officers involved? Are there multiple citizens? What witnesses? It's kind of like conducting a criminal investigation. We're fact gatherers, so we need as much of that information as we can. And once the complainant doesn't return something, it kind of hampers us a little bit. But we still try to reach out to them to make sure that if they need any assistance in doing it, completing it, or they just may have a change of heart and say, you know what, I don't want to file the complaint anymore.
Okay, do you give them like a deadline to, like, before you
No, we
reach
just,
out?
no, we explain to them, but we keep an eye on it. You know, when it gets to be about a week, we'll call to say, you know, hey, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, the complainant person, you know, you came in to complain against a police officer, we provide you the complaint form. Is everything okay, or you have problems filling it out? Do you need any assistance with it? And sometimes they'll say, nope, I don't wish to file the complaint anymore, and they don't want to do anything with it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a question in terms of the complaints since July 1st,
Yes, sir.
which would come under this whole new process that they have in place. And we'll probably follow up with you later on this one, but if we have 3 complaints come through the system, and of course you have complaints that come directly to you, if the decision is made to go through the mediation process, and right now you stop the investigation, would you consider, or we can discuss it down the road, that if a complaint came in, that at least the ACC would know that it was closed in the mediation process?
Yes, sir.
So that they can have the stats and it'll be in sync with what you have and what they would have.
Yeah, we're definitely would let you know that.
Okay.
That's just something that we're going to do in the
I
process.
think that'll be very
Yeah,
helpful.
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
We definitely would reach out to the board to let them know that both parties agreed to mediation, and just so you were aware of it.
Right.
And we'll also put that on a complaint tracker too, for the citizen. So if they
Right.
wanted to look at that, they could see that it's a mediated case.
They want to make sure that when they see one coming in, that then it drops off. So at least they can see it. We can close the loop on that one.
It's
So-
still going to be on there. We're not,
Right.
we won't take it off or not put it on there.
Yeah.
If it comes in, we're going to put it on the complaint tracker so you can see it and the citizen can see it. And we'll also put the resolution or the finding of it's going to be mediation.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for Captain Parrott? Thank you very much, sir. We'll probably have other questions later. We'll follow up, and as we get our next meeting scheduled, we may have to enlighten us a little bit more about the overall process as we get the ACC piece also working.
Yep. My plan is to be as accessible to the committees as you want me to be. So you'll have my email address. If you have a question, feel free to contact me. I'm very accessible. I want to be accessible to you guys. I want to make sure that we have a good process and you are informed.
And we're all here to serve citizens and
Yes, sir.
want to do that to the best of our ability.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You just leave that there.
Okay, the Maryland State Police.
Captain Boulder, try clicking and see if it'll advance it.
Oh,
Okay, there you go. Perfect. Thank you, sir.
thank you for coming in, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Parent.
Captain.
Good evening to the board. First, I want to thank you all for your time and service to the citizens of Calvert County. Service is one of the core factors or core principles of the Maryland State Police. We believe in it, and by you serving the citizens helps us serve the citizens better. So thank you all for that.
Thank you.
My name is Shane Bolger. I'm the troop commander for the Southern Troop. With me tonight is Lieutenant Murns, the Prince Frederick Barrack Commander, and then Lieutenant Jeff Ferreira, who's the Administrative Hearing Officer for the Maryland State Police. So that's who I have in attendance with me. Ms. Allen sent us some information about specific things that you wanted to talk about. My slides, I'm going to go through here and try to hit those questions and hit those points. If at any time you have a question, please ask me, and I will do my best to answer it to the ability that I can. All right?
All right.
Okay. So first, we're going to talk about the organizational structure of the Maryland State Police. The Maryland State Police is part of the executive branch of government. It is the colonel leads the state police, and that colonel is a secretary in the governor's cabinet, works directly for the governor and is appointed by the governor. The department's broken down into 3 bureaus: the Field Operations Bureau, the Criminal Investigations Bureau, and the Sports Services Bureau. Those 3 bureaus are commanded by lieutenant colonels, and within those bureaus there are commands. I'll speak specifically about field operations because that's what you will see the most is uniformed troopers. There's a northern and a southern command, which are commanded by 2 majors. The southern command major is Major Dave Rule. He is a Prince Frederick trooper for a majority of his career. He is almost a Calvert County resident. He lives right there on the line up in Anne Arundel County. But so Major Rule has ties to Southern Maryland and is very active within our community. And then within the commands, or within the bureau and the commands, there are troops. Throughout the state, there are 6 troops. They're geographically grouped: Western, Eastern, Northern, Central, Washington Metro Troop, and then Southern Troop. So within the Southern Troop, so you understand what we have 5 barracks that I command within the 4 counties: Anne Arundel, Calvert, Charles, and St. Mary's. So the 2 barracks in Anne Arundel are Glen Burnie and the Annapolis barracks. And then the Prince Frederick barrack, the Leonardtown barrack, and the La Plata barrack. Barracks that we've talked about are commanded by lieutenants. Then we have sections, that could be commanded by a captain, a lieutenant, or a civilian director. It just depends on how important that section is, what it is. And then certain units are commanded by first sergeants. So that's kind of a little bit of the breakdown of the structure. So when you talk about the chain of command, obviously the colonel is like a CEO. He is the president, or she is the president of the department, runs the day-to-day operations. And then you have the lieutenant colonels. Like I said before, the colonel is appointed directly by the governor and works for the governor. Lieutenant colonels is an appointed rank within the Maryland State Police. It's appointed by the colonel. It's like the colonel and vice presidents, if you are talking in a business world. And then you have majors, and those majors are also appointed by the colonels. You do not test for these ranks. They are appointed positions from within the department. The colonel can be from outside of the department. That has happened in the Maryland State Police in our history. The last couple of colonels have come from within. Right now, our colonel is Jerry Jones. Then you have command staff. When you talk about command staff, you talk about the troop commanders, the barrack commanders. Those are captains, your lieutenants. And then we have an assistant barrack commander rank, which is the first sergeant detective sergeants. These are testable promotions. You have to go through a process to obtain these ranks. They are not just given to you. You have to earn them through time. You have to pass a process, and then you are ranked, and then you are promoted in order of those ranks. Sorry, I went the other way. Your patrol and your investigative ranks are sergeant, corporal. Again, those are supervisory ranks within the department. Those are your duty officers. Those are who you walk into when you come into a barrack to report a crime or ask for service, or you call the state police. You'll usually get a sergeant or a corporal. And then we have 3 different ranks, or 4 different ranks actually, of patrol troopers. We have the lowest rank of, which is a trooper. That's the person that has just graduated from the State Police Academy and has less than 3 years law enforcement experience. They'll be designated by, they'll be called what's a slick sleeve. You won't see them with any stripes or anything. We'll have a trooper first class, which is a service promotion. As long as that trooper hasn't done anything within the 3 years of leaving the academy, they are promoted to trooper first class. These two other ranks were instituted to give people a different career path if they did not want to take a supervisory role, but they wanted to be rewarded for their time and services. We're senior trooper and master trooper. So that is the chain of command structure kind of the department. Are there any questions on that?
Is it still out of the headquarters in Pikesville, right?
Yes, sir. Headquarters
Okay.
is still in Pikesville, absolutely.
Is there an insignia designation for the senior trooper or master?
Yes, sir. So, I'm sorry, thank you. Trooper first class is obviously one stripe like a private in the military. A senior trooper is a stripe with a chevron hooked to it. And then a master trooper is a stripe with a chevron, and it's a star, right? It's a star in the middle. Those are the insignias. So you'll see those if a master trooper's on the scene, that's a trooper that has some serious experience, has been around, understands things, and is almost the equivalent to a corporal, but doesn't hold that supervisory rank.
One question on the executive command staff. I saw the years that's sort of required by the, within the units, but at the executive level, even though they're appointed, are years of service typically ascribed, so are you know?
So to be appointed a major in the Maryland State Police, you have to hold the rank of at least a lieutenant.
Okay,
The colonel has the ability to promote a lieutenant or a captain to the rank of major. He also has the ability, or she also has the ability to promote a captain to the rank of lieutenant colonel. So to get to those ranks, you have to have been with the department for a while.
okay.
To go through the process, the promotional process. So,
Yep.
we're good? All right, sir. So the summary of complaints, I did not break this down as the department, but I wanted to give you guys a snapshot of Calvert County because that's what you guys are going to be dealing with, and I want you to know what our troopers are doing in your county. So a 3-year snapshot of citizen complaints within the county shows that we've had 1 sustained complaint in 3 years. We've had 2 non-sustained complaints and 5 unfounded complaints. So in the 3 years from 2019 to 2021, we have had 8 citizen complaints. And that's the breakdown of actual citizens coming to the barrack, calling or writing a letter saying, we'd like to complain on trooper so-and-so. 8 complaints, 1 sustained. Now, as of 2022, as of July 1 when things changed, or I'm sorry, August 26 when this was put together, we've had a total of 5 complaints, 2 unfounded, and 3 are open right now, which means they are actually being actively investigated. Now, contrarily to this, you'll see internal complaints. These are complaints that are made or generated from within the department. A supervisor, discovers that a trooper violated policy, or a commander discovers that. For the 3-year totals between 19 and 21, we had 7 sustained complaints, which means our supervisors are doing our job. They're supervising our people, and we're holding our people accountable. We've had a total of 15 complaints in those 3 years that were generated internally. So we're about a 50-50 ratio internally. And for 2022, we've had 3 total complaints, 1 sustained, 1 unfounded, and 1's currently open. So that's a snapshot of complaints. And these are either violations of policy, conduct, what have you, okay? Are there any questions on that? All right, we'll move on to a couple other things that we track. Use of force issues. So for 3 years, the 3-year total from 19 to 21, we've had 94 use of force complaints or use of force issues or incidents. Those 94 incidents have been reviewed from a supervisor, the assistant barrack commander, me, and then the department use of force coordinator. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But those 94 uses of force incidents all conformed or were justified to policy. This year alone, we've had 18, and again, those 18 have conformed to policy. Now, show of force is something we just started tracking, and that changed with the new law July 1. Show of force is when a trooper would have to pull his weapon and show that force, not yet use it. So we've had 2 incidents where we've had to show force, and in those incidents, when we look at it and compare it to our policies, our troopers have conformed to the policy. Vehicle pursuits, we'll talk about our policies with that. For the 3-year total, we had 24 total pursuits in 3 years down here that our troopers were involved in. 18 of those conformed, and 6 of those were non-conformed or not justified. This year, we've had 3 pursuits, and we're at a 2-to-1 ratio of conforming to not conforming. Firearm discharges, now, when you see this, wow, man, 13 times we've had a firearms discharge. That's because we are dispatching hurt animals. We have not, knock on wood, had a lethal encounter with the state police in Calvert County for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but memory serving and thinking back how I've been here, we've been very lucky with that. So, again, are there any questions on those?
No.
Okay. So we'll talk about our Internal Affairs Division. Internal Affairs Division is commanded by an MSP captain, as we talked about. So you're in that chain of command. You've obviously been here for a while. That person is usually hand-selected by the colonel or the colonel's chief of staff, and they report directly to the chief of staff. There's no buffer in between them. They go right to the colonel's chief of staff, so they have a direct pipeline to the colonel. Our IAD is made up of 13 sworn investigators. That's for the state. All right? We have 2 administrative civilian staff members that help them out. So the purpose of our Internal Affairs Division, and this is taken from our policy, I'm not going to read it directly, but IAD is there to ensure that allegations and complaints are thoroughly assigned or thoroughly investigated, and to make sure that our mission and our values are upheld. IAD is also the central repository for all the reports. Everything will go to IAD, and it's held there. They hold all the documents of any administrative actions taken against troopers. So we'll talk about the complaint process. An investigation will either be completed by Internal Affairs Division. They usually handle the more serious allegations. They would handle serious misconduct. They would handle brutality or mistreatment of prisoner investigations. They would handle if a trooper's been accused of theft from a suspect or something like that. They would handle the administrative side of that, while criminal investigations would handle the criminal investigation. Minor allegations, your unbecoming conduct, your rude, discourteous, other various complaints that are minor in nature would be shipped back to the barrack, where a supervisor would then conduct that investigation. 9 times out of 10, the employee's commander and the commander of IAD will get together, and they will determine where that case is going to go. IAD commander has the ultimate authority on the case assignments. So a barrack commander could say, I really want this assigned by IAD. And IAD's like, no, it's not rising to our level. You need to have your investigators do it. 9 times out of 10, when there's that kind of, like, hey, they'll assign an investigator as like a liaison or a sounding board for that supervisor to help out, give advice, or, sometimes sit in with the interrogations. When a complaint does come in, a review of the allegation is conducted immediately. We, check the date, time. Was that trooper working? Was this working? And the goal is generally to have investigations completed within 90 days. Some investigations are more thorough and take more time. Others are, the facts present themselves quickly, and that case can be adjudicated or at least investigated quicker. So these are some of the things that the investigator will do while conducting it. They'll try to determine the relevant facts. They'll obtain all the records, just like gathering a case in a criminal investigation. They'll try to find in-car camera, which is the MVR recordings, reports, citations that were written, anything that could be used to corroborate or refute the allegations. Unless they cannot, for some reason, do it, it's impractical, they will audio record all interviews and interrogations. Audibly. It is audibly they will do that. It's kind of hard to find rooms that have audio and visual recording, but They'll preserve all statements in an investigative file. They'll determine if there's any relationship between the complainant, the investigator, the witness, or the troopers. And when appropriate, they'll photograph the complainant and the scene, handle evidence in accordance with all our policies. So we talk about recommendations after the investigation's concluded. Very similar to the sheriff's office, but we have three, and the three are in line with the newer laws that have come in. We have sustained, unfounded, or exonerated. The accused trooper, once the complaint has been investigated and a preponderance of evidence and a finding's been found, that trooper's commander will get the whole packet in our Blue Team IA Pro database system to where they can review that, and they can agree with the investigative steps that were taken and supporting reasons. They will complete an endorsement as to whether they believe that whether they concur with the findings or they disagree. If they disagree, they have to articulate those reasons why they disagree. Then that'll be forwarded to IAD. So complaints not involving citizens. So an internal complaint, something that we generated that our supervisor saw or whatever. For categories A, B, and C of the statewide disciplinary matrix, which I believe you guys are aware of. The trooper's commander, the commander of IAD, will discuss and they will offer summary punishment if the complaint is sustained. Which means they'll sit here and say, Trooper A, this complaint was sustained. It's a category B. Here is your 1-day loss of leave if you accept it. And they'll present it to the trooper. For cases of category D, E, and F of the statewide matrix, the trooper's commander will screen the case with our departmental prosecutor. And after that screening, a hearing will be held by the Penalty Assessment Review Committee, which is made up of the chief of staff, the 3 lieutenant colonels. They hear the facts of the case. And those 4 individuals decide on what the punishment should be delivered to the trooper.
That's done in that normal 90 days? Or this?
We try to
Okay.
prepare.
Yeah, I would think that would take a little longer.
In some case, especially with the D, E, and F cases.
Yeah.
Because those tend to be longer investigations, that time is spread out.
Okay, thank you.
Complaints involving citizens. Once the complaint is complete, after July 1, it's sent to our prosecutor section for review. Our section reviews the investigation, and they will complete a written endorsement. They don't have to. They have 3 business days after the investigation to complete to send that recommendation to the statewide administrative charging committee. That committee is composed of 5 members. 3 members are picked by the governor, 1 member is picked by the president of the Senate, and the other is picked by the Speaker of the House. All 5 members, just like the local charging committee, are required by law to be trained by the police training commissions. Their responsibilities, they'll establish a schedule and make determinations on the matters within 30 days of the investigation being completed. And we talked about the three outcomes: exonerated, unfounded, and sustained. Exonerated, the trooper was within policy and did no wrong. Unfounded, the allegations not supported by fact. Or sustained, the investigation revealed the information substantiate the investigation. Once that decision is rendered, they have 5 business days to make a written decision. The department prosecutor and the colonel then decide to increase the recommended discipline. That the colonel and the prosecutor can increase the discipline from the statewide charging committee as long as it's within the matrix for that violation. So they can't take a D violation and give an F penalty. Okay? But they can increase it to the maximum D as long as it's within that. They cannot lower the recommended discipline from the committee, though. The prosecutor section has 15 days to offer the recommended discipline to the trooper. So that's kind of our process. Is there any questions or concerns with that? I know I talk a little fast. If I'm going too fast, please slow me down.
I got a few.
Okay.
Go ahead. See somebody else. So a couple of questions, and I guess I work in reverse order. That table of penalties, the D, E, and F, and all of that, is that public or is that just?
That is what the local administrative charging committee will have to follow as well. It's a statewide disciplinary
Yeah.
matrix now.
Okay, awesome. And so two more. One, have you found that the internal complaints, I saw you had a spreadsheet on that. The internal complaints, have those been primarily like between officers, or have other officers complained about an officer's treatment of the public or misconduct in an actual pursuit or something like that?
Without having, that right in front of me, 9 times out of 10, those internal complaints, Lieutenant Ferrer or Mearns can chime in here, are generated from a supervisor or the barrack commander reviewing an in-car camera situation.
Okay.
And seeing a violation of policy, or seeing a trooper, use profanity or something, and then, okay, we've got to work this out. Hey, this happened, here you go. And then discipline. That's where those internal ones come from more than anything.
Sounds good. And last one is, I know like in Calvert, oftentimes you guys may solicit, or maybe the county will pull you in on different situations. So have you had complaints, have the complaints that come in actually included like both the state and the county officer at the same time? And if so, how do you handle that complaint process?
Well, so if an incident was there, and again, not compared, if an incident was there and a citizen wanted to make a complaint on both a trooper and a deputy's involvement, I believe they would have to go to the sheriff's department to make the individual complaint on the deputy, and then come to the barrack to make the individual complaint on the deputy.
Okay.
But I have not experienced that.
Excuse me, gentlemen, your mic's down, would you mind taking this for a second?
Sure.
And we'll put this-
Invite you to sit here.
No worries. No worries.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Are there any other questions?
I had, you haven't had any complaints that have gone through the process since July, right? The state ACC hasn't met, do you know?
Lieutenant Ferrer?
I believe I saw a chart that there are 3 that have been received.
Okay.
But they have not been sent to the State Administrative Charging Committee yet.
Okay.
I believe the State Administrative Charging Committee is still in the process of being trained by the Maryland.
Okay, yeah. Same here in the county, so. If we get a complaint coming in through the PAB, like I said before, we send it to the sheriff's office, if it's a complaint from the sheriff's office. If it's a complaint on a trooper, regarding a trooper, we send it to Lieutenant, and it'll go through that process you just described. Is there a closing of that loop so that we can track and dispose of it, or?
Well, I think that would be the involvement of Lieutenant Mearns and I at the meetings.
Right.
Maybe quarterly come in and say, hey, Lieutenant Mearns, we've had 2 complaints that we've pushed to you. Can we, to close out ours, can we sit there and say, was it unfounded or was it exonerated? I believe that's something we can do. That's something we can check into and get back to you.
Good.
I don't want to speak out of turn on that, but I don't see why not.
Good. Any other questions or comments for the captain?
Okay. Well,
Thank-
moving on. Ms. Allen asked to talk about search and seizure warrants a little bit. So troopers, when they, because of July 1, or actually probably it was in October when this law went into effect, troopers are required to be in some type of uniform on a search and seizure warrant now. Gone are the days where you'll have troopers show up with, a T-shirt and shorts on at a search warrant. So if a trooper is at a search warrant, they are required to be in a uniform. Now that uniform just has to display their name and their ID number. It needs to be clearly visible. So this actually is not a uniform that by law can be on a search warrant because it does not display my ID number. So our detectives, those people who usually serve search and seizure warrants, now have a uniform that has, it would say Bolger and 0185, and it will have a badge. So troopers do not have badge numbers. That is one thing that I want the board to understand. We do have ID numbers. Our badge numbers have numbers on the back of them. That is more for a tracking purpose. But if a citizen wants to understand or asks what a trooper's badge number is, we don't have them. We have what's ID numbers. For the longest time, some ID numbers would get recycled. Like my ID number, 0185, is recycled. It was from a detective sergeant who retired in 1987, and I became a trooper in 1996. So there was enough years that had gone through the process, and that number was gone. Now our troopers have individual numbers. We're up into 7,000 and something in their numbers, and they are specific and they won't change anymore. So once, it's another thing that for search and seizure warrants, and we'll talk more about the body worn cameras in a minute, but once body worn cameras are issued, and while conducting a search, troopers will have to have their body worn cameras activated the entire time they're serving that warrant. No knock warrants. And these are just some salient points I picked on. No knock warrants may only be served by members of the state team. The state team is the Maryland State Police SWAT team, for Special Tactical Assault Team element. They can only be served between the hours of 8 and 7, so 0800 and 7 p.m. An investigator needs written permission from the unit's detective sergeant or above. So when we go back to the chain of command, remember that's that mid-management. They have to have at least a detective sergeant to sit there and say, yeah, I agree, this warrant should be a no-knock warrant. They also must be signed off by the state's attorney for whatever county it's being served in, not a deputy state's attorney or the designee. It has to be the state's attorney. So those are just a few points on search and seizure issues. Are there any questions on that? Okay. Body worn and in-car cameras. This is turning into a hot topic. Everybody, everybody has a camera now on any scene. So, by law, as of July 1st, 2023, all troopers are required who interacts with members of the public are required to have a body worn camera and have it activated. Violations of doing that may result in disciplinary actions. Right now, in the Southern Troop, all troopers below the rank of corporal, so your corporal, your master troopers, your senior troopers, TFCs, corporal and below, all have body-worn cameras issued to them. In uniform, all the uniformed troopers. At the beginning of each shift, their troopers are going to ensure that their mobile vehicle recording equipment is functional. That's the in-car camera and their body-worn camera. If it's not, they have to report that to the supervisor and log it, and then submit a ticket to get it fixed immediately. Troopers will test their body-worn cameras by audibly recording their name, ID number, the date, and the time, and the car number they're operating. Along with that, most of our patrol fleet, most of the state trooper cars out there, marked and unmarked, that are used primarily for patrol, also have an in-car camera system installed, which will record drivers' actions and stuff pre-stop. It also has a camera and a microphone inside the car that can record the trooper and the driver's actions in the car, transporting to and from wherever. So, are there questions on the cameras? All right. So, use of force. This is, again, words taken right from our policy. I'm not going to read them to you. You have the PowerPoint. But the long and short of it is we're not allowed to use a force unless force the force needs to be reasonable, needs to be necessary, needs to be proportionate, and it needs to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. Now, that objective can be anything from arresting an individual for disorderly conduct to trying to secure an individual who may be hurting themselves and taking them to the hospital for an emergency petition. As long as there's a legitimate lawful objective, force may be used. Now, that force has to be within the totality of the circumstances. It just doesn't give us a carte blanche. The decision to use force requires careful attention and continual assessment of the situation. We may start a fight may be started with an individual, or resistance may be encountered, but once that resistance ceases, the force needs to cease as well. Troopers who use force that is not reasonable, is not necessary, and is not proportionate are subject to not only corrective action, possible discipline, possible criminal prosecution, and or civil liability. So, again, when a trooper uses force, it is an assault against a person. They have to fit these guidelines, and they open themselves up to those things if they do not use force appropriately. So you talk about resistance. And there's a few types of resistance that troopers can encounter. Active resistance is just that, someone actively trying to get away, whether they're fleeing, their physical resistance to being handcuffed, they're pulling away from the trooper's grasp, or they're flailing their elbows because they don't want to be taken into custody. They're throwing punches at a trooper. That's active resistance. Passive resistance, that's where you could see at maybe some of your protests where a person just goes limp, or a person goes nonverbal, just will not answer anything. So those are the two types of resistance outlined in our policy. So general provisions of force. Troopers all have the authority to use force when it's reasonable, necessary, and proportional. When practical, they should announce that they're going to use force. Sir, if you do not comply with my orders, I'm going to use pepper spray against you. Or, ma'am, if you continue to fight with us, we're going to tase you. Or, stop resisting. Those type of things. You should hear the troopers audibly articulating those directions and those guides to citizens when we're in a use of force situation. We're only allowed to use weapons or techniques that are authorized by policy, that troopers are trained, unless warranted by the totality of circumstances. And again, troopers will cease force as soon as the person whom the force is used is under control and no longer possesses an imminent threat, or they determine the force will no longer accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. We're good to move on? We're good? Required actions when we do use force. So we've used force now. We've got compliance, or we've detained the individual. We have a duty to intervene. If we see a trooper, a deputy, a police officer, if we see someone using excessive force, we have a duty to intervene and stop that force from being used. And if we don't, we can be held liable. We can be held in violation of policy. We have a duty to provide medical assistance, whether that means flushing someone's face if they've been pepper sprayed, or removing the prongs from a taser, or trying to stop a bleed if someone has a cut from the force. And then we also try to use calm, natural demeanor when encountering persons experiencing behavioral or health disorders that are in crisis. Reporting use of force. So again, you've heard this before, this blue team. It is just a database. It is a system that we use to capture our force. Anytime a trooper uses force, shows force, a detailed account of the incident is entered in this database. The trooper writes a detailed narrative as to why they used the force they did, what led up to the use of force, what happened during the force, and what they did after using the force. They submit that. When they submit that, the force is reviewed by the trooper's supervisor, his or her first line supervisor. Then it goes to the barrack commander, and then it comes to me as the troop commander. So it is reviewed 3 times by 3 different levels of supervision to ensure that the force conformed with our policy, that it was justified, that it was necessary and proportional. Once it's finally approved, then it goes to the Force Review Unit, which is a unit within the Education and Training Division that not only trains the troopers leaving the academy, but also runs our in-service training. They review it to sit there and say, yes, this is consistent with the guidelines that are being taught in policy, and that's the final stamp of approval. If anywhere in that chain, someone says, hey, I don't know about this, a internal investigation can be started. I can tell you that as the troop commander for Southern Maryland, I've been the troop commander now for almost 5 years here. There have been 2 incidents where I've read a use of force, and I really need to see the video on this. Do we have it on video? And luckily enough, it was captured on an in-car camera. Once I saw the camera and I saw the resistance that was being done, the trooper just didn't articulate what they did as well as they should have. And it turned into a training issue. We went back and we retrained that trooper that, hey, we need to paint a broader picture. We need to paint the entire picture. So the levels of review are there for use of force. So the public safety article that we talked about, that one of the reasons we're here, where Maryland was the first state to make a statewide use of force policy. So police officers are required, we're required by law now to sign a pledge Use force only when necessary to prevent the injury to another or accomplish a legitimate lawful objective. Use force that is proportional to the resistance being offered. We are supposed to de-escalate conflict, intervene to ensure excessive force doesn't happen, render first aid, and document force when it's used. The underlying text are requirements that are different or are enhanced prior to July 1. So they've enhanced what things we do. So the department trained every trooper on the new use of force policy and law. And one of the great slides that came out of that training was this. So before July 1, we had to make a promise. We had to take an oath. So before July 1, all troopers took an oath. We took an oath to uphold the Constitution and serve the citizens. After July 1, we now have to sign a written pledge. So that was a little bit of a change. Use of force. Before July 1, it was a reasonable standard pursuant to the U.S. Supreme Court and our policy. After July 1, it's necessary and proportional pursuant to the new public safety law. Little minor change. But de-escalate conflict. That was pursuant to our policy. We were doing that before and we're doing it after. Prevent excessive force. It was MSP policy before, it's policy and law now. So this shows that even prior to the January or the July 1 law changes, MSP was doing the right thing. We had the policies there. I thought that was a great slide to show that, you know, we were ahead of the curve a little bit, and it shows that we do care about our citizens and the people we serve. So vehicle pursuits, as Captain Parrott said, this is a very hot button, very civil litigated situation. So the pursuit policy has changed dramatically in the Maryland State Police in my time. So a pursuit can present danger to the lives of the public, the trooper involved, and the suspect. So the decision to engage in a pursuit is not one that just a trooper makes out there. Oh, this guy's running from me now, I'm gonna chase him. No, the trooper has to ask for permission, has to articulate what's the road conditions, what's the speed, what's the violation for. All these different things go in before a duty officer can make a decision, and that duty officer is the sergeant back at the barrack. And all the factors, the risk versus reward are weighed. So our policy has changed to, we are only now allowed to pursue in 3 specific incidents. And those incidents are if it's a known felon, if it's a felony offense, okay? If it's a hit and run traffic collision that resulted in a bodily injury or death. And the third one is significant and reckless or disoriented driving actions prior to us attempting to stop that vehicle. So that's you know, someone weaving in and out, driving erratically, the drunk driver or the suspected drunk driver. If we see, you know, again, significant reckless driving prior to, we're allowed to pursue. Those are the only 3 times. Now again, in that pursuit, that is always being constantly evaluated. If we're, you know, on Route 4 at night and there's a significant reckless disoriented driver driving and they attempt to flee, that would be different than at 5:30 trying to go through Prince Frederick as well. It would depend on the severity, everything like that. So,
Can I ask you a question about that?
yes, sir.
So if you're behind a drunk driver and you activate your lights and to pull the driver over, that driver doesn't stop, but it's not a high speed, it's not a reckless event, what would you do? Would you follow? Would you?
So, again, it's incident-based, sir. So I can't necessarily give you a blanket answer. But if there was not significant reckless driving, if it was just the typical, this guy's weaving, he's crossed the double yellow line once or twice, if they're not stopping, the trooper would articulate that to the barrack, and then the duty officer would sit there, weigh the consequences, and say, that pursuit is authorized or that pursuit is not authorized. And if the trooper is told the pursuit is not authorized, they are to turn their emergency equipment off and discontinue, not follow. It's suggested that they go a different way.
So that there's never an instance where the trooper makes that determination. It's always that determination is made by the duty
That
officer.
determination is made by the duty officer after the trooper relays that now, sir. Any other questions on the pursuits?
So the mess that you've had to deal with on the Beltway with the 4 wheels.
Well, yeah, so there's no pursuing those. The risk is not worth the reward there. And there's just too much, potential for bad things to happen. So CALIA accreditation, we've talked about that. The Maryland State Police is currently accredited through the CALIA, and we've held that law enforcement accreditation since 2014. I made a couple of notes here from the questions that you've already made. We do have a CALIA program manager. That CALIA program manager, as Corporal Parrott, or Captain Parrott said, it is labor intensive. That manager will mail out or email out to specific barracks, hey, can you pull this policy, what you're doing for it, and send it to me, and then he or she will review it, and put it into the proof book, and that's how that one person does it for us. So with that, I thank you for your time. That is my presentation. That is my email and my work phone number, along with Lieutenant Murin's email and work phone number. As I said before, integrity, fairness, and service are our core values. They're instilled into troopers the day we enter the police academy and till the day we retire. If there are ever any questions about the Maryland State Troopers' actions in Southern Maryland, or specifically Calvert County, that you all as a board have questions for, myself and Lieutenant Murins are open to discuss as what we can, especially if there's an open investigation. But we will be here to be as transparent as possible for our citizens.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Captain, thank you very much for your time and for the information you've shared. It's helpful to us and also to the public that have a better appreciation for what's done at the state level. I do have one question in terms of the state accountability, not the accountability, the state administrative charging. That 5-member board covers state police, DNR, natural resource police, and all of that, or are they separate?
Yes, sir. All state agencies.
Wow, that's probably a full-time position up there. Okay.
Well, I believe it, July 1, when these boards were enacted, to ensure that there was a statewide equitability in charging, they created the board, and then they decided that all state law enforcement officers would be part of that.
And just a comment about complaints you may get for speeding. All those vehicles have the GPS where you can track this, you can actually track the speed of any of your vehicles at any time.
If you have a mobile
You can get,
terminal, if you have a
need to hear.
mobile data terminal in your car, yes, it does have GPS and you can track that.
Okay.
So if we do get the complaints for speeding, we have that avenue to be able to look at that.
He has to give you a mic so he can hear.
We also can track using body-worn cameras as well. In the law, I think now it's changed where you have to have a minute of view time prior to actually pulling a car over, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So, but some cars, some of our cars, not all, have in-car cameras. So we do have the capability in those is to check speed.
So for the state, can you track the speed of all your vehicles that are on the road?
I'm not 100% sure. I do know that when reviewing the in-car camera system and the body-worn camera system, you can pull up the speed. There's a way to do that. That's actually been used in departmental collisions investigations. But also, as Captain Parrott said, our cameras record a minute, not only the body-worn, but the in-car camera will record prior to, but it only keeps that if you would activate it. So if I'm driving and I wanted to stop a car and I activate my lights, that minute recording would now be part of.
Got it. Okay.
If I explained that correctly.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Okay. So that's helpful for us to get an appreciation for the law enforcement agencies that we have potential receiving complaints from the public. Any other comments in that area that any of you have? Okay. Couple of items quickly on here. We had mentioned bylaws. So we're in the process now with staff of looking at draft bylaws and have come back to this board with at least a draft to start with, and we can add in whatever we want to add in terms of the bylaws. We do have the regulation, but bylaws would address things like if you missed 2 or 3 meetings or something like that. So, we will put together a draft to bring back to the board for. Is there anything else there? Oh, okay. So that'll be on a future agenda. We also, the state's attorney, Harvey, at the public comment last time mentioned the memorandum of understanding, and we'll start to contact you in your office. And of course, you guys are going through an election too, so.
Well, I have heard that. If could I just address, just for a minute? I was here tonight to request that we get working on this memorandum of understanding, and perhaps the board could appoint somebody or someone up to work with me and my staff in developing this document. And the reason I'm asking is because there are a couple of complaints that have come across my desk, and I think they've come through you, citizen complaints regarding use of force, that I look at to determine whether or not there's any criminal liability. And I wanted to make it very clear to each of you that that's our job, is to determine whether or not there's probable cause to believe a crime has been committed. And if we find that probable cause, then we will charge a police officer. That's completely, I don't know, say it's completely different from what you do, but what I determine in terms of probable cause is not necessarily binding on anything that you would do, and I want to make that very clear. I sometimes am called upon to review an investigation by a police agency and issue what we call a declination letter, saying I've looked at this and have not found that probable cause standard to be met, and we're declining to prosecute. I want you to understand that that doesn't in any way limit or restrict or define what you all do. And I think that needs to be made clear in this memorandum of understanding. And I certainly don't want the situation to present itself where an agency might come to you and say, well, hey, the state's attorney said there's no criminal liability here. That's what that means. There's no criminal liability here. It doesn't mean that there might not have been misconduct in office or some other actionable item that would come before you. So that's essentially what I wanted to make clear.
So we'll get a couple people to work with you. I'm assuming the county attorney would be involved in that.
Sure.
And probably, let me talk to John offline and see what we'll do in terms of representation.
Yeah, I'm
from the
not sure
board
that
also.
it's necessarily going to be me alone, but me and somebody else
Yes.
probably. We have a few of these things out there, so we have some kind of document to work from.
Right, that's good. Good.
Great.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. And also with the sheriff's office, as we'll have a memorandum of understanding, because we're actually talking about an independent organization, as I mentioned at the beginning. So we'll have to put something in place with the sheriff's office so that we are together meeting the needs of the public
Yes, sir.
and the citizens. So we look forward to working with the state's attorney's office and also the sheriff's office on that.
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir.
If you have someone say anything? Any suggestions for future agenda items that you would want to, anyone you want to bring before us to give us more details on anything, or items that we should consider for future agendas? We've asked DNR to come in. I'm not sure if we had a commitment yet for the Natural Resource Police to come in, but we've also asked them to come in.
What about Charles County Sheriff Office?
Charles County?
Yeah, because they've maintained CLEA this entire time, so I'd be curious.
Right. And bring them in terms of the summary of what they're doing?
Yes.
Let me-
They started out small.
Charles County, okay. We'll follow up and see what we can do there to get somebody from there. And of course, we'll bring the sheriff's office back once the political dust is settled. Having experienced that process myself, I'm sure they're looking forward to some stability.
Haven't had to experience that the last 20 years, for sure.
Any other items you feel that we should put on the agenda going forward? Remember, by the end of December, the charge we have before us is that we have to produce the first annual report. And in there would be, you can look at the requirement, our responsibilities, but in there would be any kind of suggestions that we have jointly discussed with the law enforcement agency that we would like to recommend. So it's important to get that MOU, and we may not get an MOU done by December because November is the election. But however, we may be able to start some things early on that, and then we get to the point where we can bring in the new leadership and along with you, Captain, and talk about any recommendations that we may have going forward. Yeah. Okay. Public comment.
If there's anyone online that wishes to provide public comment, please press *9 or use the raise your hand function. If there's anybody in the room that wishes to provide public comment, please make your way to the microphone.
Anyone in the room for public comment?
Is there anyone online?
No one has raised their hand.
No one raising their hand? Okay.
TS is monitoring.
Oh, okay. We have someone, I think.
Is that someone wishing to provide public comment?
No one has raised their hand.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. We have no one for public comment. The next meeting, we have to have at least one additional meeting before the putting together of that report. So we had pending October 5th. I don't know whether we need a meeting on October 5th, let's see how much information we can bring in and share with the board in terms of, that's why I'm asking for any items that you wanted to talk about before we get into the looking at what we're going to report at the end of our first year. Although it's not a year, it's a half a year. So right now is October 5th good, tentatively. Let's see if we have enough for that. Is that good for everybody, 6:30?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, and going forward after that, we perhaps may be on a quarterly schedule. Okay. Anything else to come before us this evening?
Mr. Parent, if they have ideas for the end of the year report, they certainly can email and we can help coordinate
Yeah.
that.
And bylaws and any other agenda items you may want to see, please email them to me.
Why don't we send out an email requesting that way we can make sure that everyone gets it. Stephanie, thanks for joining us. That is one area, as I said before, that's sort of forming, and there will be more information in terms of the trial board and the frequency in which you will meet going forward, but we'll keep you in the loop on whatever comes up.
Do we have any statistics on how often something is sent to the trial board, just to get a sense of historically how often that's occurred?
Captain, you have any statistics in terms of how many appeals? It would be an appeal of a disciplinary action, right?
I tell you, to be honest with you, we don't get a lot. We don't have a lot that goes to the trial board. I think for my 10 years.
Microphone?
You need to get to the mic, I think. A mic, right? So we can hear
Maybe
you.
in my 10 years of doing this current position, I think we probably only had 6 or 7 cases that have ever been to a trial board.
Okay.
Generally, the officers accept the discipline that's recommended to them and move on. Either that, they're no longer with us.
Okay. Thank you.
And we're also looking, Cindy, for any training that the trial board member may need.
We're working on that, nothing
Yeah.
set at this time, sir.
Right.
We're developing that.
Okay. If there's nothing else to come before the board, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourn? I'm sure we are. Aye. Anyone want to stay longer?
No, thank you.
Stand adjourned.